Good afternoon, everyone. How's everybody doing today? Hanging in there? Thumbs up, I hope. Allison got to sleep in again today, so good, good. All right, so what I've decided to do for today is skip ahead a little bit. I want to get now into the medical ethics part of the class because this is why everything we've been building towards has been building towards this. And it's time that we spend the last 2 weeks of class talking about different issues that will affect you in your field. Okay. So we're going from more of the abstract philosophy ethics to more of like the applied ethics now. And whether or not you're going in the medical field or not, some of you in here are just in humanities or social science or whatever. Whether or not you're going into the medical field or not, this is different. These issues are certainly applicable to our world right now. These are very much hot button political issues that are constantly being discussed. So, very important part of our class. I did want to say one thing about what I cut, and that was over the past 100+ years of the philosophical tradition, there has been kind of a move towards what we call moral relativism. I've talked about moral relativism in the past, before. Moral relativism is pretty much this idea that all this stuff that we've been talking about regarding ethics and morality, it's all based on culture, right? So if you remember, I mentioned this idea before. Like, who's to say that my idea is any more right than anybody else's idea? Like, maybe we here in America think that we should have equal. Well, I don't want to go that far. We believe that women should have rights in America, right? Other countries like Saudi Arabia might not think so. Who's to say that we're right and who's to say that they're right, right? They have an opinion, we have an opinion. It's all based on culture. That's kind of like what moral relativism goes to. Frankly, I didn't want to spend an entire class talking about this because I think it's an idiotic ethical theory. Um, I think we've all kind of established in the course that that just doesn't work. Okay, there have been different schools and ways of getting to that answer, but that I could have traced. But that's kind of the answer that it all leads into over the past 100+ years of the philosophical tradition, at least, towards this idea of moral relativism. So some people sort of lean towards moral relativism, though. We can, we will mention it here and there as we kind of talk through the medical stuff. I just wanted to kind of give you a quick peek of that. We had discussed it before, um, probably in more detail then, but everything leads to that. Rather than spending a whole day talking about that, I figured we'd get to this stuff. So let's take a look here. Your final paper of the class will be on bioethics. Okay. Speaking of which, I'm now working on your papers. Several of you have gotten them back already. If you haven't gotten them back, I hope to have everyone's done by tomorrow. Okay. So when you do get them back, if you get a grade that you aren't pleased with, I will give you a chance to revise it, okay, for a better grade. So you will get that opportunity. I figure that's especially important since we're only doing 2 papers instead of 3. That first one, especially if you struggle a bit, you will have an option to revise it. So keep note of that. So far, I've read like 4 or 5. They've been pretty good so far. Let's discuss this idea now of bioethics and the framework that I give. If you take a look at our Moodle page for this week, the very first thing that we have, it says moral status PowerPoint slides. So that's kind of what I'm going to be going over. I actually didn't make these slides. I borrowed them from whenever I took classes on this stuff over the past year or two. I got permission to use them. Okay. So let's kind of talk through them. So all these different theories of ethics that we've been talking about, whether it's Kant, whether it's the utilitarians, whether it's Hobbes, Rousseau, the natural law, um, Aristotle's framework, no matter what system that you go towards, these systems all kind of lead to different ways of thinking about hot button issues that are pertinent within, especially the medical industry. And this is a very important part of this class. And I will also say this is also very important that you get this from me, that you don't get it from some of your maybe like nursing professors or something, because it's important that you know, especially on certain things like this, that you have rights as a provider of healthcare. Okay, you actually do have a right to refuse service if you are uncomfortable providing certain services. And we will be talking about some of the that pose lots of ethical issues over the next 2 or 3 classes. But you do have rights. Oftentimes it kind of boils down to, if it's something like an emergency situation and nobody else can be there to do the procedure, oftentimes you just kind of have to document your reservations and kind of move on. But if it's something that you can reasonably get a substitute person to do that procedure or something, you do have the ability to opt out. There's sort of a morality clause. Usually you might get frowned on for doing it, you might be pressured to do it, but you do have rights, ethical rights, even with your own practice. Most of you guys in here are doing rad tech, so you will see in the next couple of classes, like what if you're pro-life, and what if the doctor tells you have to help assist do an abortion? Okay, well, you do have rights to opt out. Okay, so that's something that's important to hear from me as a philosopher. I'm not a medical expert, I'm a philosopher. Okay, but it is important that you hear it from me, that you do have certain rights, and especially in some of these hot issues we're going to talk about. Abortion's not going to be the only one. We're going to talk about stuff like IVF, embryo research. What about how do you treat people at the end of life? Like, do you euthanize them? Like, when do you pull the plug on certain people? We're going to be talking about all these different things. Okay, the way that I'm looking at it is through this idea called moral status. This is kind of a framework for thinking about bioethics. So just to kind of moral status is something that you can think about not only in terms as this slide says at the bottom of the first page. It's something that you can think about in terms of different entities as well. Like, obviously, we're thinking about human beings, but what about even like animals? Do animals have certain rights? Even something like a plant, right? Does a plant have certain rights? These are all things that ethicists are arguing about in current circles. Like, we're mostly focused on the human being with the way that I teach the class. But, like, what, even if you want to think about other things, like, what about animals? Is it right to test medical products on animals? PETA would certainly say no. Um, these are all important things that are being discussed, and especially in current discourse. But the question is, what is moral status? And this idea comes up. There was a philosopher in the 1970s named Mary Ann Warren who kind of came up with this framework called moral status. Okay. She said to have moral status is to be morally considerable or to have moral standing. It is to be an entity toward which moral agents have or can have moral obligations. If an entity has moral status, then we may not treat it in any way we please. Moral status is a concept. Encyclopedia.com says moral status is a concept that deals with who or what is so valuable that it should be treated with special regard. Whenever you think of something like medicine, of course, talking about a human being, the patient is who you're dealing with. You would think that all human beings would have equal moral status, but different frameworks that we're going to be talking about would not attribute equal moral status on certain people. Okay. Um, so Warren used this framework to especially talk about stuff like abortion, but it's something that you can think about in terms of various issues. Today, I'm mostly just going over the framework. In the coming days, we'll talk about more specific topics. So there is 8 of these theories of moral status that we're going to look at. And the first one is called human properties. So thinking about different people who you might care for in your life. This one, as I said a second ago, if you're a human being, you have full moral status. It doesn't matter what age you are, doesn't matter when you were conceived. If you're a human being, from the moment this is very much a Catholic way of thinking, a natural law way of thinking. Okay, this idea pretty much holds from the minute you were conceived, a sperm and an egg unite, forms a zygote. From that very moment, you are a full-fledged human being up until the moment that you die. So from the very beginning, when you're just a few cells, all the way up until you're dead, this first framework pretty much says you have full moral status at that point. Only human beings in this framework have full moral status. So your dog or your cat, your bird, whatever else doesn't have as much rights and moral status as what a human being would. Lots of people will take exception to that, but we can always kind of ask ourselves these questions like, why is it okay to euthanize a cat, right? But why is it not acceptable to euthanize a human being? Well, if you subscribe to this idea of human properties as being essential, human beings have greater worth and greater dignity than even the animals. Right? We talk about, this idea kind of extends across their entire class. Right? If we think about from the very beginning, the first week of class, we talked about Plato. Plato talked about human beings have a vegetative aspect to their soul, an animal aspect to their soul that's responsible for reproduction, um, eating, cravings. But we also have that intellectual part of our soul that distinguishes us from the rest of the animals. The idea, the classic philosophy definition of a human being is a rational animal. Okay, so that's kind of what makes us special in terms of everything else. We are irrational animals. We have a certain aspect of our soul that other animals and creatures do not have. That's not to say that animals don't have some moral status, but if you're kind of putting the one against the human, you would always kind of prioritize the needs of the human over the needs of the animal. Let's see. So, as this counterpoint slide says, what would be a secular? A lot of times, the human properties view is grounded in religion, okay, especially the natural law philosophy from the likes of Augustine and Aquinas. Maybe like a secular argument to some of this, thinking about something like a zygote, right when a sperm and an egg can sort of unite to form a zygote. Think to yourself, okay, an embryo, a fetus, that's, you can make the case that's not a full human being yet. When does it become a full human being? Is it when it develops certain cognitive aspects, perhaps? We'll talk about this the further we go down through the slides. If you are a child in the mother's womb, you can't live without the mother, right, up until a certain time when you're born. So, do you have moral status at that point, considering you're incapable of surviving without the mother's body? The idea of moral status oftentimes comes up too in questions of other aspects, like women's autonomy. Okay, so especially when you talk about something like abortion, does the moral status of that fetus, right, does that overrule the other reasonable ethical aspect, that is a woman's autonomy, right? Somebody not telling a woman what to do with her own body. So this is also relevant for the end of life topics. Like, you think to yourself, okay, what if you're a 90-year-old person on their deathbed? You're on a ventilator or something, right? You have to ask yourself, should we let this person go? Well, the human properties would say probably not, right? This person is a human being with moral status. It doesn't matter what their age is or whatever. So this is very much an absolute way of thinking. This is both natural law philosophy as well as Kantian in some ways. From the very moment you're born, the moment you're dead, not I used the wrong term, from the minute you're conceived to the minute you're dead, you are fully 100% a human being. This is very much a view that is formed in, especially within the aspects of Catholic philosophy. This is the main reason why, especially Catholics, tend to oppose things like abortion, because you see it even from that earliest of ages as a full-fledged human being, all the way up until you're dead. No exceptions. It's very much an absolutist way of thinking. Okay, this is the first school of moral status. Now it's going to get more complicated. Everybody's got equal rights. Doesn't matter how, if you're a human being, you have equal rights. That's kind of what the first view says. Doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter how mentally cognitive you are, no matter what. The second one is called the cognitive properties view. And in this view, you have moral status if and only if you have cognitive capacities. So, are you self-aware? Are you self-aware? Thinking about somebody who's maybe in like a coma or something, they're not self-aware. Oftentimes that's up for debate, though. Are they or aren't they? Like they oftentimes you say, if you talk to somebody and they're in a coma, they can hear you. I don't know if the science on it's absolutely definitive or not. But do you have self-awareness? Can you freely act? Can you give a justification for your actions? Can you communicate? Like whether it's with words, or whether you can write something down, or even if it's nonverbal communication, like maybe you can nod or something. Can you communicate? Can you make a conscious and rational decision? So we can already kind of think, who might this one exclude? Maybe someone who, we will talk about this next week. Maybe somebody who has suffered some type of traumatic brain injury, right? That kind of leaves them in what we would call a vegetative state. Do they have moral status? Do they have rights? We can even kind of start thinking about things like mental disability here. If a person is incapable of making a free, rational decision, do they lose moral status at that point? So this one, you can kind of see, this one we're starting to exclude people if you can't think for yourself. This one's kind of got an interesting point. Like I told you a minute ago, the definition of a human being is a rational animal. Well, if you want to think about it in that way, if we lose our rational aspect, we're just an animal, right? So do we then have moral status at that point? So it's an interesting way of thinking. The third one is called sentience and interest. So this one's very much in the utilitarian sort of framework, or Epicurean sort of way of thinking. Like one of the reasons why we talk about utilitarianism, it kind of leads to this. Can the being in question experience pain and pleasure? Pain and pleasure. So a human being, most of the time, if everything's working right, we can experience pain and pleasure. A plant or a rock cannot. Um, Certain beings don't like for instance, I went through a traumatic experience this weekend. I had to put down my beloved cat of 13 years. Okay, it's one of the hardest things I ever had to do. Um, but eventually, it got to the point where my cat was only suffering. Right, her kidneys were shutting down, and it caused her to get high blood pressure to the point that she went blind. Okay, this all happened last week. Well, at that point, is there any more pleasure in life that my cat could have gotten? Maybe, but it seemed like the suffering would have been way more than any type of good that she could have got out of living life. So whether you're an animal or a human being, this idea kind of suggests if you are capable of feeling pain or pleasure, you have certain rights, certain moral status. To cause pain would be to wrong them. This one, this one starts getting a little murky as well when you start thinking about the implications of it. Especially when we start thinking about stuff like beginning of life topics. It's easy enough to think about how this might apply to the end of life. What about the beginning? So, when you think about something like abortion, which we're going to talk about Wednesday, can a fetus feel pain? Right? Can a fetus feel pain? Maybe some would argue, especially later in the pregnancy, it could, but like early in like the first trimester, maybe not. So if you kind of go with that premise, um, later term abortions would be okay, but maybe early ones or later term would be bad, but early ones would be acceptable perhaps. What about something like IVF where you have a bunch of embryos in a lab? Well, arguably an embryo that's just been fertilized can't feel pain, so we shouldn't have to worry about its moral status. What about somebody who is in a coma who can no longer feel pain? Um, do they have any moral status? All these questions kind of come up, but this one suggests you do if you can feel pain and pleasure. It's kind of an offshoot of the cognitive. It's a little bit more specific because the cognitive would say if your brain's working, right, you have moral status. But maybe in the third one, your brain would be damaged in such a way where you no longer would feel pleasure or pain. What then? You might not have moral status. The fourth one is relationships. So, can you have relationships with another being? Um, this one starts getting complicated as well. Like, if you think about, especially the earliest of terms in the early life topics, like maybe at that point, the mother has not yet fully developed a full working relationship with the child, right? You don't feel that connection just yet. But maybe later, when you start going through your ultrasounds and you start seeing the baby like take shape, maybe at that point you start to develop more of an emotional attachment. So at that point, according to this school, you would start the baby would start to have moral status because you actually feel something towards it. What about as we keep going through life? What about something like I don't know. What about somebody who's getting ready to die at a very old age? Well, this one would suggest they have moral status too, because you have a relationship with that person. You've developed a relationship with that person. So this one kind of seems to suggest, especially mostly, and when you think about topics early in life, from the beginning of life, if it's incapable of having a relationship, if it's something again, if it's something like an embryo, um, a very early stage fetus, do they have moral status? Not according to the relationship school. It's kind of hard to have relationships with an embryo in a lab. Okay. The fifth one, personhood. It says person is a moral and philosophical term for beings who are part of our moral community and as such deserve moral consideration. This premise is at the base of many contested issues. Some grant personhood at 8 weeks, viability, birth later. So what, according to this one's a little more, this is kind of like a secular way of explaining the human being, okay? Unlike the first one, which is more of a religious way of explaining the human being, this one's kind of like a criteria list. If you check all these boxes, you're a human being. You have personhood. Thus, you have moral status. So, Warren's characteristics that she came up with: do you have consciousness? Like, are you aware? You know who you are? Do you have reasoning? Like, can you solve a complex problem, as the slide says? Do you display self-motivated activity? Can you communicate? Do you have not only consciousness but self-awareness? Consciousness and self-awareness, I kind of lump those together. Maybe you're awake and conscious, but don't have self-awareness. So I probably shouldn't have lumped those together. You have to check every one of those things off to have moral status. If you don't, you're not a full person according to this view. So it's not check 4 of the 5. You have to check all 5. That's kind of what this one suggests. As this counterpoint to this one says, it doesn't specify if one or all are necessary. But whenever you think about a topic like abortion, it's a little bit different than thinking about something like infanticide. Oftentimes, pro-life advocates will kind of lump them together, right? Like oftentimes they'll lie and say that a child is born after 9 months and then they just kill it or something. Like oftentimes that's what pro-life people like to say. That's not true, okay? But if you wanted to go there, when an infant's first born, does it check all those boxes? Arguably not. It can communicate, it can cry. It doesn't yet have the ability to have reasoning. It's up until a certain age, according to psychology, an infant doesn't yet have self-awareness. The psychological idea for this is called the mirror stage. Okay, Jacques Lacan says that that moment when maybe it's like a young toddler or something, a late, like an infant at a certain age, maybe like a year old, early toddler. When an infant looks in the mirror for the first time, waves her hand, and then kind of puts together that, oh, wait, that's me waving my hand in the mirror. That psychological theory of the mirror study suggests that's the moment where you start really develop personhood, right? You become a person in that moment. You kind of form the first person perspective in your mind. That is me. That is I. Okay. Up until that point, until you develop self consciousness, arguably you're not a full human being according to the school. What about if you've got Alzheimer's? Like certainly things like self awareness comes into play there. What about something like, for lack of better words, mental retardation? Right, that's a ugly word. But what about something like that? Do you lose moral status at that point? So if you have to check all 5 of these off, you can kind of start to see maybe some implications of that. Okay, maybe certain people start losing status. This chart, this chart here goes way deep into that if you want to take a look. But to kind of keep it going, the next one is called The Future Like Ours. So, does the being in question, if you take a certain course of action, will it deprive that being in question of a future? Kind of what I was mentioning a second ago about my cat. Um, what what type of future did my cat have ahead of her? Well, with kidneys that were about ready to kill her anyway, she might have lived another month or two, probably in a lot of pain. Did she really have a future? That I deprive her of a great future? I'd like to think arguably not. Okay, there wasn't much enjoyment she could have gotten. This is a secular way of looking at pro-life, if you think about it. If you kind of kill the fetus at any point, you're depriving a human being of everything that the human being could ever be. Yeah, murder always works that way. You know, you're kind of removing that person from everything they ever could be. This is a way of thinking about something like the death penalty as well. The death penalty is a very hot ethical topic. Um, it is the view of many. I share this view, okay, that the death penalty is wrong, even if the person has done unquestionable, awful depravity and evil. Maybe that person can redeem themselves in some way, right? Maybe the person can come to terms with themselves and seek redemption in some way. Ask for God's grace. If you kill a person, you're depriving them of everything they ever could be. So that is the future like ours argument. If you think about this one in terms of things like the end of life, what if you're in a vegetative state? What if you appear to be something like brain dead? Um, Arguably, you don't have a future at that point. So maybe you lose moral status. What if you lose your cognition? You're in a vegetative state, but you can still make it if somebody takes care of you. What then? Uh, Arguably, at that point, the person doesn't really have much of a future. They're just going to kind of live in a vegetative way for the rest of their life. So at that point, do they have moral status? This one's good for thinking about something like early life. Are you depriving that being of something that ever could be? But as we kind of take away things like consciousness and ability to live the way we would think, they have a future then. If you don't, if the answer is no, this theory would suggest you no longer have rights or moral status. You can make a counter argument to that, even thinking about like something like abortion. Um, what about oftentimes people will get abortions, right, because maybe for class issues, right? Like maybe you're a really young person, you're incapable of taking care of that child. Do you really want to subject the child to stuff like the foster care system? Maybe they would go well in that. Maybe they wouldn't. If you did go through and give the child up for adoption, would that child have a future? Some would say no. You're just kind of reducing that child to a life of pain. What about something like thinking about something like Down syndrome? Okay, what if you're going to have a child that has something like that? Prenatal screening is something we're going to talk about next class. What if the prenatal screening says, okay, your child's going to have Down syndrome. You want to have an abortion or not? Okay. Well, if you subscribe to this view, the future like ours, what kind of life will that future potentiality? What kind of life will that child have with that problem? So oftentimes the prenatal screening will kind of suggest this stuff, giving you a choice, thinking, will this child have a future or not? So certainly an interesting way of thinking about it. Um, Potentiality is the next one. So this one goes way back to Aristotle as well, right? Like potency and actuality. This school would kind of suggest, especially for early life stuff, that you're not, especially at that very young stage, maybe like as a fertilized egg or something. At that point, you're not yet an actual human being, right? You haven't evolved to that yet. It takes a long time during the course of the pregnancy to evolve into a full human being. Um, so this one kind of suggests what could be, even thinking about something like an embryo in a lab that's not yet a human being, doesn't have human features. Um, it could be. Just because it can be doesn't mean it is. Think about something like insects, right? Think about like insects, a butterfly. Well, a certain stage, it's a caterpillar, right? But it's not yet a butterfly. So it's the same kind of thinking here when it comes to things like the human being. Okay. And the graduated theory is very similar, and this is the last one of the lot. Let's see, where did I go? This one kind of suggests the old. This one's kind of a curve, like very young age, you don't have moral status. As the child develops and matures in the womb, it starts to get moral status. As a human being, of course, for most of your life, while you're healthy, you have full moral status. But maybe as you get old and you get frail, maybe you start to lose your mind with Alzheimer's or something, you start to lose moral status. So you start low, go up, stay up, go down. That's kind of like the type of line that you would have according to the graduated school. So that's all 8 of them. It's graduated, potential, future like ours, personhood, relationships, sentience and interest, cognitive properties, human properties is the first one. Let's spend a few minutes discussing these. Of the 8, which one stands out to you guys as I was going through it? Which one kind of stood out? Like, that makes sense. Which was it? Maybe one of you guys just chime in here. Which one really popped at you, thinking that sounds right for some reason or other? Likewise, which one might have popped out as heck no? That's a silly way to think. I'll give you guys a second to take a minute, take a look through them again, read over them again. Maybe write down the one that stands out to you, whether good or bad. Okay, then we can maybe take it from there.
Is it okay if I don't remember the name of it, but I remember what it was about?
Yeah. Yep.
I don't agree with the one that said the second that any life is formed, like any type of life is formed, not birth yet, but like for example, a pregnant woman, like the second the fetus forms, like it's a source of life. I don't really agree with that one, to be honest. Like I kind of do, but not to the extent of what it was trying to say, if that makes sense.
So you're talking about the first one on the list, human properties. From the moment you're born to the moment you're dead, you have full
I don't
status.
I'm not sure if it was that one because it was one that said something about before you're born.
Yeah. Again,
Oh, okay.
I twisted my term there accidentally. Yeah. From the moment you're
Okay.
conceived to the
Yes.
moment that you're dead, you have full
I
status.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that one. And I would even argue that towards the end of whenever you die, like if it was from old age, I'd still like, yeah, you have life, but a lot of people kind of go senile, and I feel like that's not a way of living. They're just surviving, if that kind of makes sense. So I wouldn't agree with it for the fetus way, and for sometimes, not always, the like aging way of dying.
Okay. So it sounds like you're making the case more for like a graduated theory of moral status, then, right? Like suggesting that early age you don't yet have it, but then as you mature through the pregnancy, you start to get it. As you go through life, you have it.
Yes.
Then as you get older, you lose it. That's kind of what.
Yes.
Okay. So that look like you got something on the tip of your tongue there, Allison. Yeah, you're giving me that inquisitive look. You did.
Um, I have to disagree with Lauren. I do think human rights start at conception.
Okay. Why so?
Um, because I do believe it immediately. I know fetus, whatever, but I do believe that's like human life starts at conception.
Okay.
And so I think those rights correlate. They start at conception as well.
Yeah, this is something we're going to explore more on Wednesday. We're going to read different arguments about it. But one of the arguments that the Catholic Church raises about this is that even from that moment, like if you look, they actually bring science in. Like it's not just religion; they bring science in. They say from that earliest of moments when it's a zygote, the full DNA pattern of that child's future is already established right at that beginning when the sperm and the egg meet. You have all the DNA of the father and all the DNA of the mother there. So everything about that correlates to becoming a full human being. That's one of the things we'll read about Wednesday to kind of support what Allison said there. That's one of the arguments they make. What about, just to kind of quiz you a little bit more there, Allison, what about as you get older? Like you still think you keep it, like even at a very, very old age?
I do. I don't think. I don't know. It like I would say yes because
Okay.
I mean that's still a human being.
Yeah.
Whether you're old, whether you're just conceived, like you're human. So, and like
Okay.
I understand that like obviously at conception you can't survive on your own, but also a newborn baby, it's not like it's the same, like it's dependent.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just
Okay.
depend on different things.
I partially agree because I do think it's life. Like I'm not saying that it's not. I kind of just worded it like that. But what I mean is like I feel like there's a difference between living and surviving. So okay, this is like an example that I thought of. It might not make sense when I say it, but this is what I thought of. So, for example, you work at a hospital and a mentally ill patient comes in and they start to act crazy and get violent. You don't ask them for their consent to sedate them. You just sedate them. You know what I mean? So that's why I feel like at that point they're not really living; they're just surviving. I'm not saying people should die. Like that's not what I meant. I was just saying that I didn't fully agree with that um like that perspective. And I think newborn babies and stuff, of course, but I was really just saying like as a zygote, before you're born, before you're out. That's what I was thinking. And when I also said for older people, I don't mean for all older people. There's people that's like 130 years old and they're still functioning and living a great life. But there are some that their minds just deteriorate into a point where they're really just surviving and they're not living. And that's why people get, you know, what I can't remember what it's called, but not euthanized, but when people like assisted suicide, like things like that.
Yeah, like that's something we're going to be looking at over the next week, Lauren. Like, what if you're in a state where you're just living on a ventilator? There's no cognitive capacity there. You're just surviving, as you said.
Yes, or like when people have, it's not brittle bone disease, but it's the other one. I know a lot of people get assisted suicide when they have it. Like the more as time goes, the more their body's just in constant pain. They're not really living at that time. They're just really surviving. So I feel like they should have the choice to be able to do something like that.
So we got two competing views already. We got the graduated versus the human properties. What about some of the rest of you guys? Emily, what do you think? I know you always got good stuff.
I actually agree with Allison. I feel like once a baby is conceived, at that point they are human, whether they're born or not. So it's one of those things where it's like they should have rights. Like I'm just gonna put it that way. And as far as like older people go, I don't really have an answer for that one because I'm not really sure. Because if somebody's suffering, it's like, should they fight and should they live and fight it, or should they just be let go?
Mm-hmm.
And trust me, as somebody who just recently lost a family member, it's hard, but it's one of those things where it's like, okay, they're not suffering, they're at rest, like that sort of thing. So it's
So you're kind of lumping a few together with your thinking, right? Like
Kind of, yeah.
that earliest of age you do, but maybe as you get older, it starts to graduate.
Mm. Maybe. Like I said, the older a person gets, it's like I really don't have an answer for that exactly. But like I said, yes, it is hard to lose family members when things like this happen. But it's like I want to look at it as like they're not suffering. But as far as like babies go, yes, from the moment of conception, I feel they are human.
Okay. I saw you turn camera on, Mandy. You got something?
Genetic test stuff, and I find that the results from
We got a bad connection, Mandy. We're not hearing you. She'll be back. Looks like she's going.
Well, while we wait for him to come back, I kind of disagree with Emily on that too. I'd even say it's better if older people, like in my opinion, I think it makes more sense for older people to have more of a right than babies that aren't even born yet.
Right, just because they are fully developed humans. Is that kind of where you're going with that, Lauren?
Yes, but maybe he's back, so it's hers for now.
You with us now, Mandy?
maybe. Can you hear me any better?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I refused to take the test for genetic testing when I was pregnant just because I felt like it would only give me something to worry about for 3 or 4 months, but I would not change as far as decision. Down syndrome babies, for example, the only reason why you would panic about that is you've never had a relationship with a Down syndrome child. Same thing with autism, those things. They are the sweetest kids on the planet. So the fact that my child had Down syndrome would not have altered me at all. I'm very cautious on what I say with abortion just because there are a lot of different reasons why women choose that. But the mentality, the one thing I would be against is the mentality that it's my body and I can choose what to do with my body, and my rights as a person trump the rights of the baby. I would have to disagree. From, and if you don't want, if it's your body, then it's your right and responsibility to take care of your body. Now, I'm not talking about situations with rape and different things. I'm not going to get into, that, my personal beliefs there, and just to be sensitive to people, but just in general, the mentality that you can procreate, have a baby, and just decide it's my right and I don't want to do it, then you should have the right and the responsibility to make sure that you're not put in that position, and that if you do become pregnant, that you either enable a family that cannot have children to adopt, and carry it to term, or to just decide that I'm a mom now. It's time to grow up.
Yeah, to complicate what you just said there, Mandy, you introduced some interesting threads. The human properties, the first one would argue, like even in cases of like rape or something, even then, your own personal issues don't trump a new life. So
Me personally, I can tell you that if it was me, if I could not raise that baby because of the effect that had happened to me, I would carry that baby and I'd be like, "Hey, Allison, I need you to adopt this baby because I will always see the baby as the event that caused the baby." If I can't get past that, but I would still carry that baby. I would still enable someone, because it's not the baby's fault how they were conceived. It's not the baby's fault that that man was drunk, irrational, whatever it was that happened. Me personally, that would not justify an abortion to me, because that baby is still a life, a right. But I'm just, like I said, sensitive on what I say with other people, because you don't know their walks of life and the reasons behind those things.
Okay, I feel like I'm playing devil's advocate because personally, I would never get an abortion or anything,
right.
but I do have some things to say. So first, when you said about the Down syndrome thing, I agree. I personally wouldn't do the same thing, but I grew up with two brothers who were severely autistic, and my mom was a single mom. And honestly, if people, like, for example, worked a lot, like, I really can't find an example, but let's say two people work together and they work too much, or is a single mom, or maybe she's just not financially stable enough to raise a mentally disabled child. I honestly wouldn't. I think she should have the choice to abort or not. I mean, she should be able to abort if she wanted to, because foster systems really do not treat disabled kids good at all. Daycares aren't really good to disabled kids either. I love my brothers, I really do. And obviously, I wouldn't abort if I was in that situation. But I think people that are in that situation should be able to, and I wouldn't blame them if they did.
I don't think it's our place to judge them. I mean, you can have your stance. I can be pro-life or not. I'm not in judgment of anybody like in this class or in any forum or platform. I think that we all are going to stand up for what we believe in. So I would never, if you came to me today and you said, hey, I just had an abortion, I would still sit down and have tea with you. I would still have a conversation with you. I'd still have lunch with you. So my response to you is not because it's not going to be any different just because we had a different moral or ethical viewpoint on something. But I would still stand on, I have autistic nephews and several of them actually on both sides of the family, and am in love with them. I just think they're little geniuses. And you're right, as far as foster care and stuff, that's challenging and it's hard. And as a foster parent, I can tell you, I understand that. So I'm not here to judge anybody that makes that decision, but regardless of what that doctor would tell me, that's why I didn't take the test. It doesn't matter if you told me I've got one toe and one eye. Well, we're going.
I agree. I just felt like saying something like this to contradict, just to hear people's opinions on it. But I agree with you.
Yeah, what about some of the rest of you all? All roads lead to Jordan eventually. So where's your thinking at, Jordan?
Oh boy. I knew it was coming. Honestly, all of these make me uncomfortable in some way. Like, I'm trying to work through, like, which ones. I feel like I'm always trying to work through the different stances instead of just picking one. But I'm like looking through all of them and I'm thinking through all of them. And I mean, human properties, it's very like clear cut. Like it gives a very like kind of simple, ultimate perspective on it. And, that's kind of, that could be helpful. I've talked about it before, but I'm religious. And, I was raised with a pro-choice or pro-life stance, and, there's a lot of things that like, I don't know about, like, for example, like when the soul, enters the body and stuff. Things that I think Catholicism provides answers to or tries to, but that Protestantism doesn't really do to the same degree. And the idea of just, taking infant lives, or like the lives of like fetuses, not knowing whether or not they already have a soul, bothers me. A lot of the other ones, which at the same time, I have to say that I have no proof that fetuses have a soul either. And some of the arguments about like personhood kind of like leave me with questions like, is my personhood determined like by my DNA? From like the second that I'm born, is that what makes me human? The DNA that I was born with? Maybe. Is it like cognitive? Maybe, but I have concerns about the cognitive element too, because how do you determine that? Like, how do you determine, like, if it's our cognitive capacities, that make us human, then, and we've addressed this, but there's all these issues about like, people with different cognitive functions and, different like disabilities and stuff like that. So how do you determine, I mean, I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that some lives are, or it's okay to like terminate some lives over others based on, whether or not they have autism or something. That, I think that's a really scary way of thinking. So it's, I mean, oh God, sentience and interest. Moral status is conferred by the ability to experience pain and pleasure. Um, I don't know. Like, all of this, I don't think there's a single one that doesn't have some kind of complication that has to be accounted for.
Yeah, you gave a very similar answer to what Emily gave earlier, right? Like she was seeing the human properties from the beginning, but saw problems as he got older. Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down to one. Hannah, I saw where you turned your camera on. You got something to offer to this conversation?
I mean, not really. My belief has always been like I want to say life does begin at conception.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is circumstantial. I mean, there was a Charlie Kirk, and I'm not trying to get into politics or anything like that, but there was a Charlie Kirk interview that was circling around a couple months ago. It was an abortion debate. And I know he was talking to this girl, and she was asking him if his, I think, 13-year-old young daughter at the time got pregnant, would he have her carry that baby to full term? And his answer was yes. And I'm not saying not all 13-year-olds couldn't carry a baby to full term. It happens, they do. Not all can, It's circumstantial. I think as a Christian, I think God does understand why we make the decisions we make. And I mean, he's God. He can decide and do anything. So.
Yeah, to build on what you said, what if it's even younger than that, right? Like you hear about molestation cases, like where 9, 10-year-old girls get pregnant. Like you could potentially put that child's life at risk by making them carry the baby to term. Like, is that right? That complicates it even more than a 13-year-old, I would say, Hannah.
But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, that's a you added something good there.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with, there's a million different reasons to have one. Like, even if I was pro-abortion, pro-life, there is 100 reasons and 100 scenarios to have one. I personally believe that because of my faith, I believe that if God knew that 10-year-old would, lose their life or whatever, he can be responsible for that decision. I could not make that decision. Even if it was my own child and the doctor said it's baby's life or your own child, I could not make the decision because I wouldn't want that. I don't know. That's probably the worst case scenario ever. Like, literally, because an adult is one thing, but you're talking a child. I mean, that I don't know. That is definitely the hardest scenario that I've ever had. But I would like to think that I would have to say, I don't understand how or why, but just believe that he would take care of the situation.
And that's a very much a Kantian answer you gave there, Mandy. Like, as soon as you take an action, you are responsible, right? So the best thing is to kind of leave it in God's hands at that point. Yeah, today is just the beginning of all this. Okay, so we're going to spend the next week and a half unpacking all of this. So on Wednesday, I did give you guys some readings to take a look at. You didn't have to do any reading for today, but the first reading's called Dignitas Personae. That is very much the Roman Catholic view on all this stuff. Like Jordan was talking about earlier, like they give arguments about when does the soul get infused into the body and all this stuff. So give that one a read over. That one not only talks about stuff like abortion, but it also goes into a lot of things like IVF. There's an article from Warren, who's I talked about in the slides. She wrote in a whole article just about abortion, and that's a really interesting one to read. She goes into like secular arguments about it. So give that one a read, and we'll unpack those. And I'm also giving you a small reading about the issue of ectopic pregnancies. Okay, like especially like a pregnancy that will put a mother's life at risk. What to do in such circumstances as that. So we will have a very lively discussion, I'm sure, on Wednesday. We're going to get way more into this, and we just scratched the surface today. We're going to get way more into it after you guys do some of this reading. Okay. And I also have the prompt for the last paper up now. I didn't get a chance to talk about it today. I'll mention that more on Wednesday as well. So you can read it, take a look. We'll talk about it on Wednesday. So between now and then, you will get your papers back from me. Okay, so I'm working on them right now. Finally. So we'll see you all Wednesday.
Hey.
Before
Oh, I was about to say, I was going to ask what your viewpoint on it was. Which one do you agree with?
Well, it's complicated even for me because I'm Roman Catholic, so I tend to look at things from the first one. But like how the conversation, like I think you were the one who started entering the contingency stuff. I start to lose the absolute view of it when you start to really get into the contingency stuff. Like, what if it's a 9-year-old child? It could put the child's life at risk. Like, I would break from the church teaching and say it's okay to do it in a circumstance like that. So that's kind of how I tend to look at it. I'm uncomfortable looking at everything from an absolute perspective. So what you said, Lauren, that's where I start to lose my absolute thinking on it.
Yeah, honestly, I'm full pro-choice. I'll be honest, fully, completely. If somebody I just feel like an abortion is a traumatizing thing for anybody to go through anyway. So I feel like if they are doing it, it's most likely because they're in a predicament where they most likely should. You know what I mean? Like they probably can't financially provide or something.
Yeah.
You know? Now, of course, there's some times where it's like, but you can't be pro-choice if you say no to some. You know? So that's why it's just like, people can do what they want, honestly. You know? It's not affecting me. So this is how I see it, though.
Yeah.
But I understand why other people disagree. That's just, why are you looking like that? This is what I think, you know? If somebody doesn't want to carry a child, then they shouldn't have to. And most likely if they don't want to and they were forced to, they either A, find a way to do it, just like gun laws or something, or drugs. it's illegal, but people are going to find a way to go through with it anyway, just in a more dangerous manner.
Mm-hmm.
Or I don't think Jordan agrees, but I noticed a
Yeah,
lot of people in the call didn't agree with me, so that's why I was being extra and adding stuff that I didn't even believe in, just to kind of play devil's advocate, honestly. But
no, like what you said is true. Like if you outlaw it, people are still going to do it, and it will arguably make it even unsafer for everyone involved.
mhm,
So that's a reasonable point, I think.
so I mean, like I said, personally, I wouldn't do it, but I think people should have the option too. And I think that for assisted suicide and all that, if people want to do something, I think they should most likely be able to if it involves their self-being. But, or also if abortion was banned, then people who have miscarried, right, they would most likely have to carry full term because when they miscarry, they go through an abortion to get rid of the baby in there so they don't go through sepsis. You know,
Mm-hmm.
so even then, that's why I think it should. I just think it should be allowed. If you
Yeah,
do certain, if you do certain circumstances, then that's when it get tricky. So I just think it should just be full on allowed.
yeah. Hold that thought for Wednesday because one of those articles that I'm giving is exactly about that.
Gotcha. But Jordan looks concerned.
Uh,
But I'm
just to be clear, I'm not judging you, Lauren. I'm just generally uncomfortable
okay.
and unsure of what perspectives to adopt just
Yeah.
yet. So
I get that. But I'll let y'all two have it. I'm at the gym anyway, so I'll let y'all go.
Take it easy, Lauren. See you
All
Wednesday.
right. See you. Y'all have a good
I
one.
sent you your midterm back, by the way.
That's all. That's all.
You can come pick it up if you want.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
I have a question about Wednesday. So the Suicide Prevention Club rescheduled the tips training for Wednesday at 2.
Okay.
I'm registered for it, and I'm the club president. So
I mean, you've had perfect attendance every day, so I think it'll be okay if you miss one day.
okay, I just wanted to bring it up and ask you before I skipped.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, you can catch the conversation after I post it.
Yeah, because it's like all of these are recorded, so I'll still be able to catch up and everything.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. I will see you later, Dr. Yeager.
All right. See you, Jordan.